Literature with the capital L allows us to talk about many different interpretations. This story right here, put on your big boy pants as we get lost in the labyrinth of the Garden of Forking Paths.
They invented the compass for this story.
Welcome to the CodeX Cantina, where I am Una.
And I am Lost Crypto. Help me, Una, help me.
Just keep following the left and you will find that is where the literature adventure heads. We take a conversational approach to the stories that we read. If you're down for talking about some of the most important stories that have influenced today's authors, hit that subscribe button to join us.
And as always, we start off with publication information. The Garden of Forking Paths was published in 1941, and our version was translated by Helen Temple and Ruthven Todd, and we will leave a link down in the description below where you can listen for free.
So our friends Noah and Yasmin have been talking about Borges for long enough that we needed to jump in and get our toes wet. And holy cow, this story right here. I don't even know where to begin with this piece because I kind of wrote down some ideas. But we're talking about a detective chase, murder mystery. We've got a frame narrative, metafiction and breakdowns of reality, unreliable narrator, visualizations into the past and future, the validity of oneself, imposter syndrome, nationalism and being foreign, stepping into one's own past with generational problems, myth of Sisyphus, a man on an odyssey of self-discovery, sirens distracting you on the journey. How on earth do you come up with one cohesive story on this that everybody's going to agree on?
Is this story self-aware? I mean, you literally have so many paths we could take to this video tonight. In the multiverse, some other Crypto and Una are going to do something different.
Go to the other universes, and that's where we're breaking it down differently. This is a novel scope in a short story format is the best way to describe this.
That's beautiful.
Let's talk about a plot recap to make sure we're all on the same page, and then we'll jump into some of our analysis. So the narrator, Yu Sun, is the grandson of Sui Pen, who was building this great labyrinth and writing a book when he died. Now in the present, Yu Sun is a Chinese spy in the UK working for Germany. The story is told via this written statement near the end of World War II. And it starts off where Yu Sun is calling Victor Runeberg, his handler, okay, in order to tell him about this British artillery park target that the Germans can hit, right? And when he calls and hears Captain Richard Madden on the other line, he realizes his handler has either been killed, caught, captured, something along the lines, and he's next. It's time to start this chase, is what it is. Now, Yu Sun is being pursued by Captain Richard Madden, and he's happy and feels victorious when he boards a train moments in time as it pulls off and he sees Madden has missed the train.
It'd be a great scene in the movie.
And now Yu Sun gets off at Ash Grove, where some local boys are like, oh, hey, you're probably looking up for this guy, this Chinese sonologist up here on the way. And he's like, oh, yeah, actually I am. That's exactly where I'm going.
Like he's done this before.
He's drawn to the house by hearing this Chinese music. Very strange. But he's greeted and offered to see the Garden of Forking Paths by a servant with a paper lantern upon arriving at the house. Now he's introduced to this labyrinth of symbols, if you will, and we read a letter about the infinite status of books and how it must be cyclical. Now, eventually, what he sees is Richard approaching the place. He is going to be caught soon. So he grabs a gun from Alfred, turns, pow, and shoots him dead. This tells the leader, quote unquote, that the bomb should be dropped in a city called Albert. Because he just shot a guy named Albert. Like, totally obvious symbology there, right? Duh, that's how I send messages, right? So Madden arrests him, sending the message of Albert to the leader, basically, and we'll end the plot, the deposition, the paper, the expose there.
Man, but that ending, right? The last sentence makes almost the whole story. I've never seen anything like this before, except in modern movies.
This is so strange because we have nonfiction elements, right? We open up with the story about Liddell Hart And the history of the World War, I looked it up and I don't see a book exactly by that name. I don't know if it's a translation problem, but he's a real person who has written historical books and such. And he's talking about a real military event. And he's talking about how, it was delayed by several days. No big deal because of this rain. And then that's our launching point into Borges's fiction. We're drawn in. We're invited into the labyrinth of Borges here. And what he does is he just perfectly blends the elements of fiction and nonfiction in the story, I would say.
Yeah, you never know really where you're at in the story of, is this truth or not truth? And it kind of reminds me of modern sci-fi well before any of that was kind of written or invented. It's brilliant, and he's subtly guiding you down this path and you don't even realize it.
Well, and then the writing is how the characters feel too, right? It's frantic, it's jarring, it's disjointed, it's got this weight of movement behind it, probably how these characters feel when they're being chased.
Now, when you were reading it, I know for myself personally, I felt my palms getting a little sweaty. And I felt like I was speeding up as I was reading the story. Like I was going faster because of what the character's doing, because I felt this need to go, go, go.
Yeah, I started physically just like gripping my book harder and harder. It was like very frantic. And you have these moments in this book. So going back to the blurred lines concept, we have a reference to the book Hong Long Meng, which is one of China's 4 great novels, right? And in the opening of this novel, there's this couplet that says, "Truth becomes fiction when the fiction's true. Real becomes not real where the unreal's real," from The Dream of the Red Chamber. And I'm like, is Borges being cheeky here or what, as he creates this real, not real, fiction, nonfiction story, and he's taking real books with these references to the exact same thing. And mind you, that book also ends on a little bit of a weird cliffhanger-y type vibe too. So how cheeky is Borges getting here? I don't think this is an accident.
And the one thing about this too is that history is a narrative, right? If we look back, we all kind of accept what has happened, but none of us were really there. And as a historian, we take the letters and we take the novels and we take the newspapers and all of that information and we record all of that information and then present it or regurgitate it back out. But we really don't know what kind of happened. But we take that information and we present what we think might have happened in this story of history and life.
And arguably that's what a lot of this interpretation is, right? We all have, unless you're a positivist, we all have this experience in life, but we're not 100% shaped by the events around us. We still have some internal control. We still have this very subjective truth in ourselves with how we interpret the world. And that's kind of a very meta conversation with what's happening in this story too, is I think a lot of people may walk away from this story with different takeaways. Now, one thing that I think we can all kind of like agree upon is time is very important in this story. In fact, the words only mentioned 23 times in the short 8 pages of this story.
That's crazy. If 2 people got the exact same out of the story, I would be actually worried because there's so much depth in those 8 pages. Yes, I think we can all agree on certain takeaways, but our interpretation has to be different because there's so much crammed in there.
So we have this quote, "The Garden of Forking Paths is an enormous guessing game, or parable, in which the subject is time." So again, real quick pause. The Garden of the Forking Paths is the name of his father's book that was unfinished, published in this real world in Luis Borges' book, which do we call that nonfiction because that's a real book, but it's a fictional work? This onion goes very far, but anyways.
It's Inception level stuff, right?
It really is. The rules of the game forbid the use of the word itself. To eliminate a word completely, to refer to it by means of inept phrases and obvious paraphrases, is perhaps the best way of drawing attention to it. I have translated the whole work. I can state categorically that not once has the word time been used in the whole book, which is just super ironic because it has been used 23 times in the Borges version of the book, but not the grandfather book. What does that mean? What does that mean when Borges is trying to play with this line between calling out this fictional creation of a story of the own metafictional story that it's being presented in, arguably too? Because not long after this, I mean, he just drops the whole, quantum theory on us of, by the way, there's multiple universes. There's probably a universe out there where this book does have the word time mentioned in it. Like,
I think it's at this point in the story that I realized that I was not smart enough to comprehend that. And I'm okay admitting that, because this is, it's something that is almost unknowable, right?
Well, I'll say this. This line actually got me a little bit more comfortable with how uncomfortable I felt. Because if you remember earlier in the story, right, our main character knows the past, present, and future. It's like, huh? Like, if this is a deposition, this is all in the past. You can't know the future. And he talks about how there's the rope that'll come around his neck, or the bullet that crushes the throat. And remember, he shoots Albert, presumably in the throat. I don't know. But we have these moments of the character knowing the future before he ought to know the future. And Borges is giving us this permission to explore time, to explore all-knowing, to explore different universes of events, and say, hey, I'm going to break some rules here. Expect to come along the journey with me.
Yeah, I'm blown away. I don't know what else to say.
Let me throw you a line. All right, let me throw you a line. Let me give you my interpretation. And again, you've got different ones here, okay?
Okay.
I think, the way I took this is we have a very metafictional way of talking about this story in and of itself, okay? So he's talking about his grandfather creating this book and creating a labyrinth. There are two things that he is creating. And arguably, he's squishing them together with the book as a labyrinth, okay? As a labyrinth of life, as a labyrinth of time, as a labyrinth of heritage and cultural storytelling. Because you'll notice he has these quotes in here where he talks about stories never being done. Stories being something that generations add onto, that they create, and they continue to move on. And if you think about it, if we look at novels as a whole, haven't we kind of told all the main stories? Like I'm not saying like every word has been said before in like one of those thought experiments, but haven't we told the redemption story? Haven't we told the betrayal story? Haven't we always told all of these stories? Like, are we really getting that unique of an experience now? If we take the universe, the quantum theory, depending on what your universe you're in and what context you're in, you can have a totally different experience. You can have a totally different story. And to me, that's what novels are. They're taking specific contexts of stories, and they can give value into us as readers, and they can give different values to future generations, and generations take those stories and mold them and change them and create their own stories as they add on and subtract to stories that have been told throughout the generations.
So with this, I think about it, I think, okay, if this is saying that quantum mechanics and reality is real, that it's breaking the idea of free will and fate, because there are so many other options out there. Even though you may not have the ability to obtain them, they are there. Is that maybe a way to interpret this?
I'm not going to tell anyone what way they have to interpret it, right?
Because that's where my brain kind of goes to, of that the main character knew what was going to happen, yet he didn't seem to be able to change it. Or maybe he didn't want to change it.
And his motivations are so strange too, right? He knows the people he's working for hate him and want to kill him, the Germans, right? He knows that there's a lot of Asian hate, but he wants to impress them. He wants to show them that they can help, that they can be of use to it. And he's being chased by an Irishman. Working for them is the one that's chasing them. So we have two people completely out of their home territories value system competing for the enemy. In a sense, they should be working together, not against each other almost.
Yeah, it's like they're put in this microcosm that breaks their cultural identity and really brings out their ego, I guess, or their id. I don't know which one it would be. But in this scenario, it isn't typical. It's atypical of what you would expect of these two individuals to do.
Let me give you one more example of how this book labyrinth thing, I think, kind of play off each other. And I think that's the way he structured this short story in and of itself. When it comes to a labyrinth, okay, you have to enter into that labyrinth, right? And I think that's what Borges is doing with this blurring of fiction and nonfiction. We have this intro paragraph, and he's like, do you want to know the truth? Let me tell you that story. So you have to enter into this labyrinth. Once you enter, you've got to find your way, right? We're totally confused as to what way to go, in the same way that this story is very disorienting, I feel like, from a reader's perspective. We're trying to find our goal. We're trying to find our end in a maze, in the same way that we're trying to find the meaning. What's the reason this story is being told as the story pushes on as well? Fair point?
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like it'd be just as simple as, oh, he has to let them know where to bomb. But other times it's like, oh, there's so many layers, like you said.
Well, and then compare it with the ending too, right? If he had made it so concrete by the ending, that would, I think, rob the reader of the ability to assign their own meaning. It, unfortunately, would take them out of the labyrinth. I think the point of being lost in this book is that search for your own meaning. It is your search for what is my point in this whole narrative of life, of how I add to it and where I find meaning from it, in a sense, too. I think this is kind of a very inviting way to have that conversation.
And that's why we read, right? That's why these stories are so amazing, is because they are so thought-provoking, instead of just the same old that we rehash. Oh, we've done the hero's journey, we've done the religious thing, we've done the history thing. This is something that breaks the mold.
Yeah. And it's almost like you said about the self-aware aspect of the story too. The opening of this is these huge country forces at war. And it's almost like this huge operation that's getting ready to be planned. Oh, delayed for a couple days by nature. Totally irrelevant, right? And then there's this spy chase story, in a sense, that's kind of being told too, where time is constantly being played with. And is time relevant? And does time matter to the point of that opening frame narrative introduction?
Yeah, because in real life, a lot of world history changing events have happened because of random weather events. D-Day, Spanish Armada, world changing stuff. And he's saying, that's not really important, but this is. And that's pretty cool.
Right. I just think the history side of it's so interesting. And then we didn't even talk about all the literary allusions in this too, right? So you had the reference to 1001 Nights, right? We had the reference to, in my opinion, it was a reference when he's walking through the town and he hears the Chinese music, like the music of his culture, and he's called to it. It kind of reminded me of the sirens as this man's on his odyssey.
Oh, yeah. Like you what's his name?
Ulysses,
yeah. I didn't even think about that. That's a good one.
And if you remember, he's stuck on this island for a while. He's disoriented in the same way that we're kind of lost in the labyrinth of this story for a while too. Like, where do you stop with the analysis in the story? When are you like, okay, that's enough. Okay, let's stop there. Like,
it's been 4 hours. Can we be done now? No, you cannot be done. We have one left to take.
Well, and we didn't even talk about how the whole quantum theory, like, this is kind of like The Sound of Thunder, where this story predates the actual scientific knowledge of it, in the same way that, the Mandela effect in The Sound of Thunder that predated that. How do I wrap my brain around that when the whole point of the story had to deal with this concept of time and knowing the future too? Like, where am I supposed to take this?
I feel like this guy was from an alternate universe. I feel like he had to be from an alternate reality. He came over and he's like, I'm gonna mess with these guys because they don't know anything yet.
So at the time of publishing this video, there will only be one Borges story in the playlist. But me knowing the future, I know there will be more Borges stories I will be adding to that list, because this story was bonkers, crazy, bonkers, uncomfortable. This really pushed me as a reader, and I loved what it did for me in that regards. Let's talk about our subjective ratings on this one, Crypto. Not an objective opinion of the story, just how did it hit you?
I'm going to give this one a 9.5. I feel like we could do another 3 or 4 videos on this. I feel like other cryptos have done 3 or 4 different videos on this. I I don't feel like my brain gets broken too often. I struggle sometimes. I have to reread sometimes, but I never feel stupid. And at times I felt stupid. And you know what? I'm okay with that because I think it makes me grow as a reader. And I think that was the point of getting lost in this maze, is you had to work to get your way out. And I'm still working on that. And that makes you a better critical thinker. And that's one of the key things of why we do this, is so that people will read more and critically think more for themselves instead of just being spoon-fed things.
And to think this was only 10 pages of this huge book of his writing that we have to go through now.
10 pages.
I don't know what he's going to do to my brain, but we're going to find out. Easy 9.5 from me as well. What an interesting story. Guys, I'll leave a link down below for Noah and Yasmin and their talk down below. We would love to hear your thoughts on this story. Hit us up down below after you read this and commiserate with us, celebrate with us, however you feel. I want to know how you're feeling down below, guys. I am Una. We post videos every Monday and Thursday. Hit that subscribe button to join us. Peace.
Peace.